Okay, everyone, this is the video lecture, the first part of the video lecture for Chapter 20. Chapter 20 will be the last lecture, or last chapter rather, for the course for this semester. All right, so basically in Chapter 20 here, we're going to talk about what's called ecosystem energetics. Basically, studies of how it is that energy moves through an ecosystem, all right? How it's absorbed initially by autotrophs, for example, like plants, and then how that energy is then subsequently made available to the other species in the community of an ecosystem, and then how that energy essentially goes back into the environment once all is said and done. Okay, so we know that light from the sun provides energy in the form of photons. Think of a photon as a discrete packet of light energy. Now, an important question is how are these photons transformed into other forms of energy that can then subsequently be used by organisms in the community? Well, photons, first of all, can be transformed into heat when they reach the atmosphere, the land, or the water. And so this heat energy warms the air, it warms the waters of the oceans, it warms the surface of the land. And ultimately, this heat energy derived from sunlight, photons, is what drives the water cycle. It's what causes water currents, ocean currents. It's what causes the wind, and ultimately it's what causes the weather. Now, photosynthetic organisms can transform some of this light energy into the energy of chemical bonds. Chemical potential energy of covalent bonds between carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur primarily. Those make up probably about 99% of the elements that are found in most organic compounds in biochemistry. So this chemical bond energy then is stored in carbon-based compounds. Think sugars, proteins, fats, nucleic acids. And this is ultimately what becomes the food for everything, right? Okay, when you eat something, what your cells are doing through the process of cellular respiration is extracting that chemical bond energy that used to be sunlight. Chemical bond energy that was stored up as a plant or some type of autotroph captured sunlight and then converted it to chemical energy, using it to build sugar molecules, which then become the basis for everything else. All right. And the thing about ecological processes is that because they're obviously driven by energy from the sun, ultimately they must obey physical laws, primarily the laws of thermodynamics. These are what govern the energy flow through an ecosystem. So we have two types of energy. We have potential energy, which is energy that's stored in some way. It's available and capable of performing work, but not currently performing work. It's being stored. Kinetic energy is the energy of motion, and it does perform work. Okay, so if force acts on an object, displacing it, moving it from point A to point B, energy of motion is kinetic energy. All right, so we have the first law of thermodynamics. All right, now some of this might seem like review from your intro biology courses or whatever, but it's very important stuff, so it pays to sort of talk about this again. The first law of thermodynamics describes the conservation of energy. It basically says that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. We can change energy from one form to another. Energy can move from one place to another. And energy can act on matter in a variety of ways, but energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can be converted or transferred or transformed. All right. Now, during a process where energy is converted or transferred, no gain or loss in total energy occurs. So, for example, when you burn a piece of wood on a fireplace or in a fireplace, the potential energy stored in that wood is ultimately released from the chemical bonds as heat and light, okay? And so that potential energy that's stored equals the kinetic energy generated as heat and light. There's no energy created and there's none destroyed. 100% of it is converted to heat and light, okay? All right. Now, as far as chemical reactions go, There are two types of chemical reactions, and I would suspect that you guys have all had chemistry. You should be familiar with this. We have what are called exothermic reactions. And exothermic reactions are reactions that proceed with a net loss of energy. They give off energy to the environment. Burning a piece of wood is an exothermic reaction. It gives off energy in the form of heat and light. We also have endothermic reactions. These are reactions whereby energy is absorbed as the reaction goes forward. So you can think of exothermic reactions as essentially the same as catabolic reactions. Catabolic reactions, as you should know, are reactions that tear something down, breaking down a sugar molecule, for example, into CO2 and water, like what happens in cell respiration. That's a catabolic reaction, but it's also exothermic. When something breaks down, it gives off energy, and thus it's exothermic. Now, endothermic reactions require an input of energy to move forward, and this means they're also going to be anabolic. Anabolic reactions are those that build. If you want to build CO2 and water into a complex sugar molecule, as plants do through photosynthesis, you need a source of energy to do that work. And that's what sunlight is, the energy to do that work. So an endothermic reaction, in that it requires an energy input, results in an anabolic process that builds something. Okay? So in the reactions of photosynthesis, the reactants, simple molecules like CO2 and water, store less energy than the products, sugars do, that you get at the end of the process. Extra energy stored in the products comes from light. That means that when you break down a sugar molecule to get the energy out, you are extracting energy that used to be sunlight. And then you're using that. Your body is using that energy. So the body heat you're giving off at this very moment used to be sunlight. The energy that's being transferred as a nerve impulse from one nerve cell to the next that allows you to think and move and that sort of thing, that energy used to be sunlight. All right. So through these energy transfers, potential energy can degrade into a form of energy that cannot do additional work. That form is heat. Energy goes from the system to the environment as heat, and heat is a very random, disorganized form of energy that typically cannot be used to do work. When we talk about conversion of energy, or like potential energy that's highly organized in the structure of a sugar molecule, let's say, and we break that sugar molecule down, extract the energy and use it to do work, that energy that we're extracting from that sugar molecule eventually goes off to the environment as heat. Right? So it goes from a very ordered form of energy, the chemical potential energy in the sugar molecule, to a very disordered form, heat. We can measure that energy transfer, or conversion, I should say, as entropy. Entropy is a measure of disorder. Okay, it describes this reduction in potential energy as a complex system breaks down to a simple system and gives off its energy to the environment. So, complex systems have low entropy because they're highly ordered. That means they're also high energy and they're unstable. A sugar molecule has high potential energy, it has low disorder, it's highly ordered, highly structured, so its entropy is low. Entropy is a measure of disorder, so its entropy is low. It's unstable because it's high energy. High energy systems are unstable, and it's complex. Our cells break down a sugar molecule through cellular respiration and convert it to CO2 and water and extract the chemical potential energy. Some of it goes off as heat. Other of it eventually goes off as heat, but before that it can be used to do work, cellular work, for example. So what you get at the end of that is CO2 and water. The CO2 and water are very disordered, very disorganized. They are high entropy systems because they have low energy, low chemical potential energy. They're simple, they're not complex, and they're stable. Okay. Now, second law of thermodynamics. Sorry for my writing. It's a particularly bad day for some reason. The second law of thermodynamics describes what happens during energy transfers. Okay, so when energy is transferred, as we've said, entropy increases, and the energy eventually, or well, part of it immediately, but all of it eventually, is converted to a form that cannot do more work. In other words, it's all converted to heat. So when energy is transferred, excuse me, from one organism to another as food, some is stored as energy in the living tissue of the organism that consumed, okay, the predator, let's say. Some is lost as heat, and entropy goes up because some energy is always lost at heat during every step of the way. All right. So the question is then, if living systems are constantly converting energy, living organisms are constantly converting energy, and their entropy is constantly going up, how do living organisms maintain order? A loss of energy, an increase of entropy would tend to decrease order. So how do living systems, living organisms maintain order? They do that by taking in more food, right? They're open systems. They take in more energy in the form of food, and that counteracts the loss of energy and the potential increase of entropy as a result of that. Now, the second law of thermodynamics here applies to closed systems. No energy or matter is exchanged with the surrounding environment. These are theoretical systems. They don't actually exist, okay? All systems are open. Eventually, in that closed system, all of the potential energy is converted to heat, and eventually there's no more chemical potential energy left or available to do work, and the system will stop. That would be cell death, okay, for a cell. But the cell has a constant supply of energy coming in the form of high energy molecules, proteins, sugars, fats, that sort of thing. You take this out to the level of an ecosystem is also an open system. There's a constant input of energy, for the most part sunlight, and this counteracts the tendency for entropy to increase as organisms convert that energy from one form to another. All right, so now let's talk about another really important concept, especially with regard to energy transformations in ecosystems, and that is the concept of primary productivity. Okay, primary productivity. This is the rate at which autotrophs convert carbon dioxide, either in water or in the atmosphere, into organic compounds. So here we're talking about autotrophs primarily being photosynthetic organisms, right? Now, we do have, those are called photoautotrophs, okay? Photoautotrophs, let me write that down. So, autotrophs are autotrophs that use sunlight in particular as their source of energy. But we also have a group of autotrophs called chemoautotrophs. Chemoautotrophs use high energy compounds as their source of energy. Primarily, these are bacteria, and they're going to be operating in environments where there's no sunlight. So, the sediment at the bottom of the ocean where there's no sunlight, for example, the sediment at the bottom of a lake or a river, some of the cave environments where there's no sunlight. Energy can be found in the form of high energy compounds, and it can be extracted by these chemoautotrophs and then made available to the other organisms in those various communities, okay? But those are kind of rare, and in terms of primary productivity, the vast majority of it on the planet is carried out by the photoautotrophs, all right? Okay, so we can talk about what's called GPP. Let me cordon this off a little bit here. GPP, or gross primary productivity, okay? So we call that GPP. This is the total rate of photosynthesis by autotrophs. It's the total rate of energy assimilated, captured, and converted by autotrophs, all right? Contrast that with net primary productivity, or NPP. This is the rate of energy storage as organic molecules after energy is expended for cellular respiration. So, net primary productivity then equals gross primary productivity minus cellular respiration. All right? Okay. So the productivity, or the rate of production in an ecosystem or a community, is usually expressed in units of energy per unit area per unit time. It's a rate, all right? So for example, kilocalories of energy assimilated per square meter per year, for example. So that might be something like kilocalories per square meter per year. That's a very common measure of productivity. All right. Very often you also see this used or expressed as grams per square meter per year. It just depends on the scale of the system that we're dealing with. Okay. And that's when we do it in terms of grams per square meter per year, that's more specifically a way to look at it in terms of dry organic matter production, right? So grams per square meter per year is talking more or less about, or is a way rather to quantify the actual biomass of organic matter produced as a result of productivity. Okay. Whereas kilocalories per square meter per year, for example, talks about just the amount of energy assimilated and absorbed and used to ultimately build that biomass. All right. We also have, let me clear this out here a little bit. We also have what's called standing crop biomass, okay, standing crop biomass, or SCB for short. This is the amount of accumulated organic matter found in an area at any given moment or any given time. This can be expressed as grams of organic matter per square meter, so very often you see it as grams per meter squared. All right, it's not a rate, so it's not the same as productivity because it's not talking about the amount of something per unit time. Okay, this is just talking about the amount of biomass covering or plant biomass, let's say, on a square meter of land at a given moment. Okay, not over some period of time. All right, so it's not the same then as productivity. Now, net primary production, for example, in terrestrial systems can be measured by estimating the change in standing crop biomass over a given interval of time. So what we need then to be able to do this, to look at what's called net primary productivity, is we need the change in standing crop biomass, and that's going to equal the standing crop biomass at time 2 minus the standing crop biomass at time 1. All right. So if we know what our standing crop biomass is at time 2, we subtract that from what it is at time 1, and that's going to be our change in standing crop biomass over that time period, whatever it might be. All right. So there are two ways then that biomass can be lost over this time period. We can have death of plants, right? Plants die. Or we can have plants that are being consumed by herbivores, insects, large mammals, whatever. In order to estimate primary productivity from standing crop biomass, here's what we need to be able to do. We need to estimate net primary productivity, and that's going to equal the change in standing crop biomass plus death of plants plus consumption of plants, all right? So if we can account for the change in standing crop biomass between time 1 and time 2, if we can account for the amount of biomass lost by plant death and the amount of plant biomass lost through consumption, then we can get a fairly accurate estimate of net primary productivity. Okay, now in aquatic ecosystems, the most common method of estimating net primary productivity is called the light-dark bottle method. Okay, the light-dark bottle method. So we can measure the amount of oxygen produced by autotrophs as an indicator of the rate of photosynthesis because we know that photosynthesis produces oxygen, right? So oxygen production and consumption can be measured, and we do this using the light-dark bottle approach or method. So a light bottle is a clear bottle, okay? And say we're doing this in a lake or a pond. We take a sample of the lake water, let's say, and it has autotrophs in it, okay? It's going to have microscopic phytoplankton, algal cells, that kind of thing. Those are the autotrophs. And we incubate that system for a period of time. If photosynthesis exceeds respiration inside that bottle, then dissolved oxygen will accumulate, okay? And this is going to be an estimate of net primary productivity, the amount of oxygen that accumulates. All right. Remember, plants, in addition to running photosynthesis and therefore producing oxygen, They also run cellular respiration, which requires oxygen in their mitochondria. So they're producing oxygen, but they're also consuming it as they break down the food molecules they produced through photosynthesis. All right. So if photosynthesis exceeds respiration, dissolved oxygen will accumulate because they're making more of it than they're using through respiration. All right. Now, what's the dark bottle about? The dark bottle, we have the same sample. So we take a second sample. It's not the exact same. It's a second sample of the same lake water, let's say. And the bottle is, usually wrapped in tape or some sort of opaque covering, so it's dark inside there. Okay. That sample is incubated right next to the light bottle for the same time period under the same conditions. There's not going to be any photosynthesis in the dark bottle because there's no light, only respiration. So dissolved oxygen will decline, and that dark bottle is going to give us an estimate then of respiration. The difference between the oxygen values in the two bottles estimates the total photosynthesis, or the gross primary productivity. Let's take a look. So here we have our light bottle, all right? So again, it's just a clear bottle. We have a lake water sample inside that. We're incubating this usually in the lake. It's sort of suspended, usually from a rope, from a boat, for example, or a buoy for a certain amount of time in the lake to mimic the natural conditions as much as we can. And we have O2 accumulating through photosynthesis, but also O2 being taken out of the water through respiration. So the net difference then between these two amounts of O2, or how much O2 is increasing or decreasing, is a measure of net primary production. All right. Now, in the dark bottle, again, what we have is the same as a lake water sample, incubated usually right next to this one, but because it's dark, there's no photosynthesis. So there's no O2 being produced. We only have O2 being consumed by the organisms in the bottle because they're carrying out cell respiration. All right. So this O2 is decreasing. It's important to recognize that the concentration of O2 is declining. It's negative. It's going down, right? So if we have the difference here, if we have net primary production as measured by how much O2 is produced minus what is being consumed, in other words, the amount of O2 here, we subtract from that the negative value of O2 here, right? Then what we end up with is the O2 produced by photosynthesis only. That is gross primary production. All right. So if you subtract a negative from something, you're adding a positive, right? It's the same thing as adding a positive, right? Remember your basic math. Okay. So here we have the O2 produced by photosynthesis plus a positive O2 consumed. That gives us the total amount of O2 we had produced in the first place, right? Okay, and that's a measure of gross primary production. And so that's what the light dark bottle method tells us. And again, this is only used for aquatic systems, either marine or freshwater. Okay. Now, in terms of the amount of net primary production in any given ecosystem, there are a number of different environmental factors, such as climate, for example, that influence the productivity in those systems, okay, especially in terrestrial systems. Typically, net primary production increases with mean annual precipitation, right? So precipitation or rainfall is one of the primary factors that helps to regulate net primary production, okay? So take a look at this figure. Here we can see that generally as precipitation goes up in millimeters, net primary productivity measured as grams per square meter per year also increases, right? So all else being equal, temperature, various other things that we'll talk about that can affect net primary production, all of those things being equal, precipitation causes it to increase. The more precipitation, the more productivity that we have, okay? Now, net primary production also increases with mean annual temperature, right? Not just precipitation. This increase in net primary production is directly related to annual solar radiation, okay? Here we see an example of that. So here we have temperature, right? So areas that get more direct incident sunlight over the year tend to be warmer, right? Think about the equator versus 50 degrees north latitude, quite a bit of difference in terms of the angle of the sun, more direct sunlight there, higher temperatures, and you can see in areas that have higher mean annual temperatures, you get more net primary productivity. So all things like precipitation being equal, for example, areas that get more sunlight and have warmer temperatures will have higher net primary productivity. There are a couple of reasons for this. One, obviously, is that higher temperatures result in higher reaction rates. So a plant will run photosynthesis at a higher rate under higher temperatures than it will under lower temperatures. And the more direct incident sunlight, the higher the ambient temperature. And so that's one thing that causes net primary productivity to go up in areas that get more sunlight. Okay. In addition to the fact that plants obviously having a richer source of sunlight, more sunlight incident per square centimeter of plant tissue, let's say, that also helps to drive more productivity. More sunlight generally transfers into more sugar being produced. All right, so areas with higher mean daily temperatures also have longer growing seasons as well. Okay, think about the equatorial regions. They have longer growing seasons than the more temperate latitudes north and south of the equator. The number of days, the growing season is sort of measured or defined as the number of days with temperatures warm enough to support photosynthesis. So here's some data on that. All right, here we have the length of the photosynthetic period in days, and here we have net primary production. This is measured as megatons, millions of tons per hectare of land surface per year, okay? And you see we have different areas of the U.S., different states, New York, Wisconsin, Carolina, the Carolinas, I guess is what they're saying, Tennessee and Massachusetts. You can see that Wisconsin, New York, Massachusetts are down here, quite a bit lower net primary production, but again, correlated with a shorter growing season, obviously. Spring starts later, fall comes on sooner, right? But then as you go up here, we hit Tennessee and the Carolinas, and we can see that we have much longer growing periods, and as a result, higher net primary productivity. All right, so this is due to, again, more sunlight, higher temperatures, more sunlight for longer periods of the year, higher temperatures for longer periods of the year, all those things sort of rolled into this. Okay, so photosynthesis requires carbon dioxide and water, obviously. Stomata are the microscopic openings on the underside of a leaf that allow for gas exchange, CO2 to come in, oxygen to go out. Water is also lost through those stomata through transpiration, okay, and to some extent through the upper leaf surface. Water that's being lost through transpiration is going to be replaced by absorption of water through the roots. And so the more precipitation that an area has means the more water is available for transpiration. So the more precipitation an area has, the more water is being sort of pumped through a plant at any given moment. The amount of water available then is an important limiter of the rate of photosynthesis, right? It also limits the number of leaves that can be produced. So by the water availability, limiting the rate of photosynthesis and also limiting the amount of leaf biomass produced, that in turn affects primary productivity. So it's kind of a complicated thing, but obviously we should expect that areas that are drier are going to have less water available for plants, less primary productivity, and vice versa. So the interaction of temperature and water availability affects net primary productivity. Warm air temperature increases transpiration rate and also plant water demand. And if water availability is low, then net primary productivity will suffer. It will also be low. Cool air temperatures, under those conditions, net primary productivity will be low regardless of water availability. All right, that's an important consideration there. So you have to realize there's an interplay of temperature, light availability, water availability that all sort of work together in a fairly complex synergy to determine what the net primary productivity rate is going to be. At a similar mean annual temperature, low rainfall sites will have lower net primary productivity, and higher or sites with higher rainfall will have higher net primary productivity. All right, so warm temperatures and adequate water supply then will give us our highest, or give an ecosystem the highest net primary productivity. We can also look at something called actual evapotranspiration. Actual ET, as it's called, is the combined value of surface evaporation and transpiration. So transpiration is water that's being pumped from the soil into the atmosphere by plants. Evaporation, again, is water that's being evaporated off of either the plant surface directly, or it's water that's evaporating off the soil surface or some other surface. Okay, you add those two, evaporation and transpiration, and you get actual evapotranspiration, the total amount of water going into the atmosphere at any given moment. And so precipitation then is going to supply the water, and then incoming solar radiation and temperature then will dictate the water demand, okay, of plants in particular. In other words, the incoming radiation and temperature will determine the rate of evapotranspiration. All right, so let's take a look at that. So here we can see the estimated actual evapotranspiration in millimeters per year. And here we have the above ground productivity in grams per square meter. So again, as evapotranspiration or actual ET goes up, we see that our productivity goes up as well. And here you see values for various ecosystems: tropical forest, hemlock beech, beech maple, pine forest, tallgrass prairie, Arctic tundra, think low temperature, creosote bush desert, could be low temperature, but also low water availability, right? So here you have the Arctic tundra, which, may have a lot of water, although it could be sort of, in many cases, frozen as permafrost, but also low temperatures, and those two combine to sort of reduce the productivity. A creosote bush desert could have low temperatures or high, it does vary on a 24-hour basis in some cases, but also the primary thing here is low water availability, and that's why you have low above ground productivity. In these communities or ecosystems, you have higher temperatures, also you'll have more water availability, so you get higher productivity. All right, so global patterns reflect the influence of climate on net primary productivity. So we can think about all these things we've just talked about that interplay to determine what net primary productivity will be for a given area, and then we can look at or sort of investigate where the zones of highest net primary productivity. We can even ask questions such as, what happens to the rate of net primary productivity as latitude changes, as we go north or south of the equator toward the poles. And that is what this figure shows. So this is a figure that shows you global measurements or estimates of net primary productivity. So you see your scale here. So the deep red is low net primary productivity. The blue and purple are the highest rates. And here we have our mean net primary productivity in grams of carbon per square meter per year. So this is just a measure, again, of how much carbon as CO2 plants are taking up and converting to organic form per meter squared per year. What you generally see is two things. So again, think about the highest rates of productivity, purple and blue, and you see a zone, an equatorial zone, generally, right, where you have the highest rates of productivity, close to the equator. Then, as you go north and south of the equator, you tend to move into the lower, the zones of lower net primary productivity. So, the eastern U.S. has fairly high productivity, and that's why the U.S. is referred to as the breadbasket, right? Think about all the agriculture that goes on here in the central U.S., okay, before you hit the desert areas more further west. Now, look here in Africa, right, North Africa, Sahara Desert, right, very, very dry, and that's why you're seeing it being barren. There's no plant life or very little plant life as a result of that. So your productivity there is almost zero. It's just on the other side of the red, right, basically. So two general patterns here: equatorial belt, where we have the highest productivity on terrestrial surfaces, and then as you go north and south of that, productivity goes down. Again, as a result of a couple of things. Temperature also declines, the amount of sunlight declines, the angle of it declines, I should say, as you go north and south. The growing seasons get shorter as you move away from the equator, and temperatures decline, obviously. So all these things are rolled into determining what the net primary productivity for an area is going to be on average. Okay, so let's look at some numbers. Okay, there's a lot of information on this table, and this is just meant as just for comparison purposes primarily. You don't have to memorize these numbers. Let's look at this column here. This is really one of the most informative ones, the mean net primary productivity per unit area. In other words, grams of carbon per square meter per year. Look at tropical rainforest, 2,000. Now, we might think that tropical rainforest would be the highest. Well, it's not the highest, but it is very high in terms of the amount of productivity going on. What's actually the highest? Swamps and marshes. The salt marshes we have along the coast of North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia, for example. These are some of the most productive terrestrial environments on the planet, even more productive than tropical rainforests, which should probably take some people by surprise. Okay, now that's for terrestrial systems, and you can see all sorts of others. So savannas, grasslands, boreal forest, temperate deciduous, and evergreen, which we have around here in Fayetteville, fairly productive, right? Pretty productive systems. Lakes and streams, about 500 grams of carbon per square meter per year. Look at a desert, rock, ice, and sand, and then desert. So very, very low productivities. Okay, tundra, very low as well. Now look at marine systems. All right, algae beds and reefs, among the most productive. Estuaries, where rivers dump into oceans, extremely productive systems as well. Areas of upwelling, where deep water hits a continental shelf and rises toward the surface, bringing nutrients with it, fairly productive. Open oceans are often referred to as deserts because they are, aquatic or marine deserts, because they have very low productivity. Okay. Now, one thing I've noticed about this table, some of these numbers are wrong. These world totals, this one's right. So 361 for total marine. Let's see, you add that to total continental right there, and you get 510. That's correct. Look at this one though, 320. So 153 plus 720 is not 320. So I'm not sure what's going on. They've got some problems with this table. But again, we're just looking for at this in terms of direct comparisons of productivity of different systems. That's the sort of take-home message from this. All right. So the availability then of essential plant nutrients also affects ecosystem productivity. So up to this point, we've talked about water availability, we've talked about temperature, we've talked about light availability, growing season or the length of the growing season, all as factors that affect net primary productivity. But here we have yet another factor that can affect that, or variable that can affect it, and that is nutrient availability. And this should make perfect sense, right? There's a good reason why we fertilize our crops. So plant nutrients, or essential plant nutrients, the availability of those affects ecosystem productivity. It influences the rate of nutrient uptake, it influences the rate of photosynthesis, and therefore the rate of plant growth, all sorts of things. The general pattern here is that net primary productivity increases with increasing soil nutrient availability. Your author cites a particular example of a study that looked at this. There was a study in Wisconsin that looked at different forest types and looked at soil nitrogen availability and the effect of increases in nitrogen availability on net primary productivity. And generally what they found was an increase, a positive relationship. So here we have increasing soil nitrogen availability measured as the rate at which nitrogen is mineralized, so kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year. So how is this happening? Well, there's nitrogen in the atmosphere, obviously. About 79% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. Plants, in association with certain types of bacteria that live in nodules of their roots, can convert that inorganic nitrogen, as N2, into organic nitrogen for use in building amino acids, and that's how that nitrogen gets mineralized and incorporated into organic compounds. Well, you see that as the rate of nitrogen mineralization goes up, the rate of above ground net primary productivity in megatons per hectare per year goes up. So it kind of asymptotes out, so it sort of flattens out, but it does go up. This is just showing you the abbreviations for the various tree types. So we have hemlock, red pine, white pine. I'm not sure what WO is, for example, but This is just showing you that across different forest types, the same pattern applies. Okay, increasing soil nitrogen availability means increasing above ground net primary productivity. We see the same thing in other communities. So as an example, or ecosystems rather, oak savannas. These are the transition ecosystems from eastern forest to western grasslands in North America. So think, driving through Illinois, for example, as you transition toward grasslands, you would start to encounter these oak savannas. And a study that examined 20 of these mature savanna stands showed that as soil nitrogen availability increased, guess what? So did net primary productivity. So we see this again, right? As nitrogen availability goes up, and that's measured again as nitrogen mineralization rate, kilograms per hectare per year converted to organic form, we see that our above ground net primary productivity in megagrams per hectare per year goes up in these oak savannas. Same pattern. And you generally see this in aquatic and marine systems as well, as we'll see in the next part of this chapter. So that's going to wrap it up for the part one of this video lecture. There's probably going to be 2 more parts to this. I imagine 3 parts is what we're going to need to cover this. But we'll get into it with the second one here in a little bit.